Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Pro AV Today. As always, I'm your host, Ben Thomas. And before we dig into our conversation today, I wanted to give a big shout out to all first responders and folks really in the world of emergency response. And I want to also steal a line from one of my colleagues that I heard recently is that some heroes also wear headsets. So in that first responder emergency response community, I'm including operations center operators and folks who are taking a lot of those calls and really relaying a lot of that information. I include you in that thank you. And, you're so appreciated, and we appreciate the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having. And if you're listening to this asking why the heck I'm starting with thank yous, I think you probably have figured out by now, either by reading the lower third on the bottom or listening to the conversation, is that our conversation today skews a little bit more towards the world of technology and emergency response. It's a world that our technology community continues to empower, but there's always questions and challenges and discussions that need to continue happening. And I want to have that conversation today and really foster a lot of those questions. So I brought on somebody who's far smarter than me in this area, far smarter than most folks that I know in the world of emergency response and kind of that public sector world. And that's Jamison Peevyhouse from RapidSOS. Jamison is the VP of Public Safety over there. Jamison, thanks so much for coming on.
Ben, I really appreciate being here, sir. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you, and I appreciate you sitting through the far too wordy monologue off the top there. But I want to give you a second really to ask at a high level, RapidSOS, fantastic company, really helping, I think, bridging the gap between a lot of those, what I would call, I don't know that off-the-grid security providers is the right word, but maybe those disconnected security tools and capabilities and connecting them with emergency response. That's one of the things you guys are great at. What specifically is your job over there and getting to oversee the world of public safety?
Oh, thank you for that, sir. So my job really is to empower the team to focus and to support public safety at large. I mean, we're an intelligent safety platform that links life-saving data from over 500 million devices into these comm centers and 911 centers all across the United States, Canada, Mexico, and other countries as well. And to ensure that data is provided in the right manner, to ensure it's used, to ensure that it will have training, et cetera. We have to have a full team of experts to do that. And today, the team I have the honor of leading has over 500 years of experience in the comm center emergency services. And so we just don't come at this as an aspect of, hey, we have to do this, let's just hire whomever. We seek out subject matter experts in public safety to ensure that every citizen is protected with the information they have in the palm of their hand, in their vehicle, in their home, or whatever. But also the telecommunicators have access to training, education about that type of data flow.
Well, Jamison, I want to ask, so a lot of times, especially folks who listen to the show on a regular basis, we're very familiar with maybe the command and control center side of the emergency response world and, integrating displays and audio systems and building IT systems and obviously even the furniture infrastructure. But a lot of times we don't get to have the conversations about, the SaaS platforms and the decentralized data sources and things like that. And that's a place really that you guys specialize. But to really start off, the conversation, I want to ask really how our emergency response organizations kind of starting right now, right? They've obviously kind of got the nucleus of the dispatch center, the emergency response center, but what are some of the common challenges right now that they may not have access to data-wise and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. If you think about emergency services and where that call actually starts in the comm center, typically it's a human interacting with an emergency. They're immersed in an environment that is overwhelming to their senses, right? They're seeing things, they're hearing things, they may be smelling things that they've never experienced before. And then they call 911 to try to report that. And in that sensory overload environment, we are relying on an analog, very slow medium to ask questions back and forth, interrogate the caller, what's going on, where are you at, what's the severity of injuries, and that person is overwhelmed. And so many times you listen to the tapes, sometimes they're very calm, sometimes they are explosive, sometimes they are very agitated, sometimes they can't even formulate an entire sentence. So how do we ensure that we're moving past that? That starts the emergency. Right, that starts that response. And if we can't source adequate information about the level and severity of that response, the correct location, we can't have an adequate response level at the get-go. And so we are always behind the eight ball. What data has done for us is given us information about that incident specific to the location at time of incident. So no longer do I have to wait for a person to drive by a car crash and have the wherewithal in that moment to dial 911, or worse, to drive by the car crash and think, well, somebody else has already called, so I'm not going to call. That delay is life-threatening. But today, sensors from the vehicle, sensors from our phones, et cetera, applications are sending that information into the comm center. So we see the severity, the location, the type of incident as it unfolds. And we can start the dispatch function on that based upon the information we're receiving. And then we know when the phone rings, that person on that scene should be validating and providing additional contextual information about what we already know. And that has changed public safety in the last few years. And we're excited about being on the forefront of that.
Well, it's a great point that you mentioned, right? And when somebody calls in to report an emergency or has a life-threatening situation, for a while they have been the only source of truth or information until those first responders or additional witnesses get out there, right? You mentioned, when your fight or flight senses are going, you're not picking up on all the nuance of the situation, and you don't necessarily even know maybe where you are or what time a fire started or what time you saw a car crash. And, having that additional information is incredibly validating because it allows you to be a little bit more proactive. But what are some of those data points? I know you talked about, specifically incidents on the road, but what are some of those other data points, even across emergencies, that are important to those emergency response organizations?
Oh, absolutely. So one of our primary partners, Apple, has a watch. Basically, if you're biking or whatever, you fall off your bike, the impact is significant enough to trigger the G-forces inside of that watch. That watch understands, hey, this person may be injured. It first attempts to notify you that's wearing the watch. If there's no response, that watch will initiate a call into 911, delivering information about that person to the comm center and say, hey, this person may be unconscious. Here's their location. For vehicles, man, the amount of trauma we have seen from vehicle accidents is severe. However, it's that first golden hour of response to get them to a level 1 trauma center or get them to a local ER to be able to stabilize that person. Every second that we can save in that process and understand that emergency better is saving lives. And so things such as, well, I passed by an accident, there was a lot of damage to the vehicle. Well, crumple zones are very misleading in the amount of damage that we have. But the vehicle tells me, the vehicle is traveling at 45 miles an hour in this direction. It came to a sudden stop with 7 G's of force, 3 airbags deployed. There were 4 occupants. Only 2 were actually restrained. There was a side impact at the initial frontal impact. That type of information is life-changing and life-saving. And those are things that we would never be able to glean from a human who's on the scene trying to tell us information. And so now we have that would be like a level 2 response or level 3 response with multiple units, or it may be a helicopter to start that process faster.
And is that typically instantaneous, or how quickly is that data transmitted?
It is instantaneous. And we've done a lot of tests across the country, of course, here in the US and Canada as well, with our partner SiriusXM. And like as soon as that incident occurs, that information's coming up inside of our portal, inside the comm center that we give to them for free. And they see the information, they see the location on the map, and then the phone call happens immediately after that. And so understand, like, man, this is amazing. And we always talk about the health and safety of the human and the public, but it's also the health and safety of the telecommunicator. And been for 50 years in the comm center, we have been working, and then the 911 phone will ring. And there is a brief few seconds there where the telecommunicator has to get their mind set and ready. So when they pick up that phone, whatever's on the other end of that line, they're going to have to handle. And it might be simple. It may be a loose animal in the neighborhood, or it may be someone whose child has just drowned in the swimming pool. And we never know what that is until we pick that phone up and then we start the interrogation. That cumulative stress and trauma on that telecommunicator is terrible. I can tell you from experience. My friends, myself, my families, it's terrible. Today, being able to give them information before that phone rings, they see it on the screen. They understand the data behind it. They know the exact location. They're like, okay, this is going to be a bad one. And the phone rings. 911, where's your emergency? I see you're reporting the accident here. Do you have any additional information? Is it a blue GMC Okay, thank you very much. That process now reduces that stress level in telecommunicator, and we see longevity in now one starting to actually mature instead of people staying in for 3 to 4 years and then having to leave because of stress environment.
Well, really, I've got a couple follow-up questions.
Sure.
We even during our pre-interview discussion, I was thinking about this because, I live in Dallas, so live here in Texas, which is by no means a rural area anymore. But, a lot of these technical applications are incredibly important for more rural and municipal areas, right?
Agreed.
Imagine now, being in Texas, I'm an hour and a half away from not being able to see anybody for miles and miles, right? But there's still a level of emergency response that has to happen, not only on those highways, but burning buildings, accidents, injury reports, things like that. How well does technology like this translate to those rural areas as well?
Great follow-on point. I would say, first of all, that if you're in Dallas, you're an hour and a half away from being in Dallas. So kudos to your traffic there.
That's fair.
So we think about what technology has done, particularly the advance of broadband throughout the U.S., right? Really getting broadband to the rural areas has allowed us to have an explosion of devices and availability of IoT in a myriad of applications. We were talking earlier about school safety, right? No longer do you have to live in a metropolitan area with a solid internet backbone to be able to have, a different level of security and safety for that campus. That is now available everywhere in the U.S. No longer are we just like, hey, only the rich people can afford cell phones. We saw that process, right? And now it's 2 or 3 devices per human. We're seeing the same thing happen in smaller communities. And so even as they build new buildings and people are beginning to think about, hey, how do we have wireless access points in here? What's the safety and security we want this? What's the access control we want in this building? That information is incredibly powerful. How are we seeing that impact public safety, even in rural areas? You talked about fire alarms. Fires in a building, right? If I have a fire alarm, the majority of fire alarms across the U.S., very high false positives. 85, 90% of those are false alarms, right? And that creates like a nomenclature of, well, it's an alarm. We'll start a vehicle. Maybe it's an emergency response. However, in a connected building, if I have a sensor go off for a smoke detector, and then all of a sudden I have a temperature sensor and the thermostat says, hey, this has increased 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 30 minutes, and there's water flow in this room, and the adjoining room alarm is now going off, that's a working structure fire. And if the building can tell me the number of MAC addresses that have been assigned out to cellular devices inside this building in the last 30 minutes, that gives me a pretty good approximation of how many people are inside the building at time of incident. Wow. What have we changed there? Now it's 2 or 3 battalion responses. We know we're going to have a couple of ambulances for folks who may have smoke inhalation, and we're getting there faster, and we're getting there with better equipment and having what I would call a wiser response on the front end. There are a lot of studies about how burning structures, particularly high rises, those first few minutes, literally 60, 90, 120 seconds. If we can get ahead of that curve, the threat to life drops significantly. But if we're behind that curve, the recovery process is much deeper. It takes much longer, and it requires more resources as well.
Well, you mentioned kind of structure fires. I think that's a good transition. We spent a lot of the conversation so far on what I would call the public side of things, right? Mm-hmm. You're talking about, road infrastructures, even schools and publicly accessible areas. But one of the places that I want to ask specifically about is that private sector, right? Even here in our building, we've got security systems, we've got access control systems, fire alarms, things like that. And I would venture to say that that's kind of a closed loop ecosystem, right? And there is data that can be effectively transmitted to the emergency response centers from a lot of these private spaces. How do you find that balance as maybe a business owner or someone who owns a piece of private property? What sort of data points are they willing to give up, or are they at scale to allow things like emergency response to be better notified?
For so long, we've only thought about emergency response as my local jurisdiction. I'm the jurisdiction having authority. I'm only concerned about things in my jurisdiction. I only purchase things in my jurisdiction. But I think about what we've been doing with Honeywell, one of the largest providers of alarms inside the entire, really the globe. And the fact that they partner with us at that level creates a different dynamic for every locality throughout the U.S. There's probably not many localities that don't have a Honeywell sensor somewhere in their jurisdiction. And I think about that. I think instead of having to go to each ECC and have them partner with each school to maybe get their data into a platform at time of emergency. That's a very small loop, but it's very hard to close. But if I go to the providers like Honeywell, who are on the bleeding edge of technology and looking at AI implications, I can partner with them for all of their alarm systems throughout the entire US. And now that scalability is massive. And every emergency communication center, every telecommunicator is going to have the same access to life-saving data in rural Tennessee as we do in New York City. And that is amazing because now we have a faster response for us. And the comm center didn't really have to do anything. They don't have to go out and source the information. So RapidSOS steps in as being that gateway between these providers of data at scale and to the comm center. And we talk about that being really global solutions married to that local intelligence. Because I can have a global solution, but having local responders who understand my process and understand my politics and my protocols, that local intelligence is incredibly important for having a safe response. And I love being at the nexus between those two things.
Well, Jamison, I've got to play devil's advocate here, right?
Sure.
And we're in a world right now where information is currency, right? Data is currency for a lot of people. And someone might hear, oh, I can integrate a device and I could get the fire emergency response here 5 minutes quicker. But, there's that natural fear and apprehension, especially as you mentioned tools like AI and predictive analytics and machine learning, where there might be people who might have a little bit of hesitancy. Do you see that regularly? Is that something that you guys face, or is it something where folks are like, hey, this could be potentially life-saving. I'm willing to give this information up?
Well, I will tell you that one of the hardest things to overcome in public safety has been change, right? We get into a very comfortable zone of response and we know what to expect. And injecting things like a data flow, it's a change in that workflow. But what we have found is if we integrate the data into the current workflows, we ensure that that data is protected, that we are providing HIPAA compliance, SOC 2 type of compliance, those things that really matter. It's trusted now. And having a background in public safety on our team, going out and speaking to individual ECCs, that trust begins to build. And over time, what we've seen is now I trust the data actually more than I trust the human, because the human is fallible. The human is really standing in this moment of just intense overload. But that data point, that sensor, that thermostat, whatever it may be, is only reporting the true nature of what's going on in that scene. And so now the data becomes actually more precise than the human element. And the data is providing us more information to take the human element out of that. Maybe I can resolve this emergency before the human gets on the scene. And isn't that why we're in public safety? It's really to change lives, right? You ask every person, why do they get in public safety? I want to save lives. The best way to save lives, reduce emergencies. And that's where we sit.
Well, I think that's, even in general, just a great response to a lot of the reluctance to automation and new technologies is the idea that, look, we recognize that change is difficult, but at the end of the day, it's about improving your life, right? Whether that's access to more safety tools or making things, from the world of robotics, doing things that humans shouldn't be or probably can't do, right? And I think that's one of the battles that we face a lot of times as a technology community is that there's a lot of fear and apprehension of the unknown. And even just anecdotally, as I've been able to really learn a lot more about kind of some of the work that you guys are doing at RapidSOS and even really in the world of public sector, is that, there are a lot of technologies that exist that the public really doesn't know about for one reason or another. One of the things that jumps out to me is really the idea of text to 911, right? Mm-hmm. I bet you and I'm pretty technologically advanced and things like that. And I didn't even know that existed till like 3 months ago, right? There's a lot of education that has to occur. So I want to ask, as maybe not necessarily an operator, but maybe a decision maker or a manager level at an emergency operations center, emergency response center, how often do you find folks like that really having to do education, not only to the public, but even to some of those providers, the Honeywells of the world that you mentioned, to have those conversations? How often do you find them having to have that conversation?
That's a great point. And I think about how we work with our B2B partners, right, our business to business partners, explaining to them how emergency response works varies by every city. right? But every response jurisdiction is a little bit different. So we use and utilize the professionalism and the history and the experience of our public safety team to inform them on better decisions. And what we find is they come with a great idea. I'm like, that's fantastic. But let's look at the workflow from the standpoint of your customer, the end customer, right? They're in an emergency. What's the most important information that we need to get into the 911 center immediately? And what's additional information that needs to follow up? And what we have found is our partners are very responsive to that. Their end goal is to protect their customers. Whatever the platform they may have, solution they may have, they want to provide protection and safety to their customers. I think about Uber in that stance with us. They want their riders and their drivers to be protected. And so a solution set that says, how do we work best with public safety to ensure that if anything happens, there's an accident, how do my customers get a higher level of service utilizing my solution and my platform through RapidSOS? And that's been really part of our core values. That trust and safety bleeds over into B2B all the way through public safety. And you start closing this gap around the citizens that we serve, whether they be a customer or they just be a local citizen that I serve on a daily basis.
You know, it's interesting. I love that you mentioned the Uber example, right? Because it is taking data that you've opted into, right, with your cell phone, whether it's accelerometer data, whether it's usage data, things like that. You could tell when somebody's been in a crash thing. But, you know, obviously the world of public safety continues to evolve as, you know, not only the data changes, but our threats continue to change, right? You see, I even hate to use this example, right? But school shootings and security breaches and you know, threats inside churches and houses of worship and public places. The threats continue to evolve. What are some of the ways that, you know, you're gathering data in unique ways to even be proactive and preventative? Because transparently, unless you've got something like you know, shot detection system, you're not going to have that data point, right? Because there's not a fire alarm that's going off. There's not all these different alarms that are going off. How do you continue to evolve as new threats continue to emerge?
Brother, I'm so glad you brought this up. One of the ways that we have looked at the data from critical incidents, such as an active assailant, whether that be in a school setting, campus setting, church setting, et cetera, is we look at the information as it comes into the ECC, right? So typically it's a very nominal day, and all of a sudden, on average, there's a spike between 15 and 22,000% increase in call volume. And then it drops off, and then the radio traffic and response spikes as well, and it continues for the first 60 minutes. So everything left of bang, left of the incident, somebody reporting shots being fired, is a typical day. How do we get left of bang for that? One of our partners, Zero Eyes. Fantastic. If you have not researched them, please do. They integrate to your already existing cameras that you have inside of your school, your church, your hospital, your commercial building. And if someone walks into a frame of that camera carrying a weapon, not shot spotter, not listening to shots being fired, but carrying a weapon, it automatically detects that weapon. It sends an immediate notification to their 24-hour monitoring center, which is staffed by either retired law enforcement or special operations forces. And they look at it and say, yep, that's not a cop. That's in a protected zone. That is a weapon. They have 3 seconds. They hit that information. It goes directly into the comm center into the hands of first responders, comes up on the map. You see the person. You see the description. You see exactly where they're at in the building. If there's an indoor map there, you see where they're standing in the building. And as they're moving through that time and space, you get updates in their location. Now your response is started before the shots have even been fired. And on average, an active shooter event, the suspect will be outside the perimeter in the field of view of a camera 4 to 6 minutes before entering the building. Do you know how many officers we can get on scene in 4 minutes with a suspect armed in a gun-free zone? That changes everything about how we think about respondents to not quite active assailants, right? That left of bang. And I talk about Zero Eyes and that platform everywhere I go because it is so powerful. The safety and security it provides to every citizen is incredible. Will it solve all issues? Of course not. But will it solve the most societal impacting ones? Yeah, it can.
Well, and I love that you mentioned that too, right? Because that really is the crossover point a lot of times between our collective communities, right? Normally, folks who are listeners and community members of this show skew a little bit more towards the hardware manufacturer, the service provider side of things. And I think you really kind of hit the nail on the head where Look, there is a natural integration between the hardware capabilities and the functionality of existing technology, whether it's in a building, whether it's in a park, whether it's, wherever you've got your technology. Heck, maybe it's in a home, right? Wherever your technology is installed, and the service provider and emergency response side of things. And it's so incredible to see, as a community, that we're willing to have those cross-departmental conversations, if you will, right? We've lived in a world for a long time where, not everybody, but a lot of folks have been more concerned about guarding the secret sauce. And I think that as our communities collectively continue to expand even beyond just the world of emergency response, you look at things like access control in general in airports and hardened places like government buildings and things like that. It's far larger than just the world of immediate emergency response. We have to keep having those conversations. And look, I am willing to be the first person to admit to you, I have a lot more questions in this world for the world of public safety and then how technology integrates than I do a lot of other areas. But it's a world that continually fascinates me because it's the true intersection of, at the end of the line, humans on the worst day of their lives in most cases, and how technology can help save their lives or make their lives literally better at a moment's notice.
Yes, sir. We think about that and where we're going as an organization, as an industry in public safety. And really the end goal for us, we want to see call volumes and emergencies drop significantly in the next 18 months. We want to start preventing emergencies so that the human doesn't have to be injured, doesn't have to pay for their car to be repaired, doesn't have to miss time off from work, doesn't get hundreds of thousands of dollars in hospital bills. If we can do that, wow, man, that's incredible for the society as a whole. It doesn't replace public safety. We're always going to have some emergencies, but if we can reduce the ones that are the most costly, both to human interactions and human impacts, we've done something. And as RapidSOS, it's a core mission. Like, we definitely want to help out in every emergency that's going on, but we want to start finding ways to prevent those as well, so that we can actually provide a deeper, I guess I'd say, value to that trust and safety we've been building now for the last 10 years.
Well, it's incredible to hear. And I'll tell you this, I know we're going to have some people asking questions. How can, I get more involved with the public safety community? How can I create technology that's more available from a data transmission standpoint? And I'll just ask you, if people are interested in learning more, maybe specifically about RapidSOS or some potential partnership or collaboration opportunities, what's the best way to reach out to you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Peevyhouse. At rapidsos.com. I always joke that's common spelling, but it's JPEEVYHOUSE. And be happy to connect you to the right people internally. Be happy to answer any questions you may have, or the concerns you may have as well. We love having good conversations, things that we may learn from your business that may be applicable to public safety, and finding a way to really marry those two things together, both for the support of the general public, but also specifically the customers that you serve on a daily basis.
Well, Jamison, look, we appreciate you having you on.
Yes, sir.
I'll tell you this, we're going to have to find a reason to have you back on the show soon, because
anytime.
This is one of the topics really in our community right now where there is a lack of education, because when you look at the world of installed technology and integrated technology, for a long time, it's been a nice to have, whether that's a conference room, whether that's, a hotel, whether that's, you name it, right? It's great to have a lot of that technology, but we're at a point now where the capabilities really allow us to cross over into a lot of different industries, emergency response being one of those. So I'm sure we'll find a way to have you on the show again here soon and continue to pick your brain a little bit more.
Sounds great, Ben. Really appreciate it, sir.
Well, thank you, Jamison, and thank you to you for tuning in as well. We appreciate you. Be sure to like and subscribe and check us out again next time on Pro AV Today.